Elden Ring just got some big news over the past week. As I'm sure you're all mostly aware of, the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC was just announced. This will be the first and probably the only DLC for Elden Ring. So in lieu of that, I've decided to make another video here converting 5 more Elden Ring enemies into stat blocks for 5th edition. Hopefully this video can hold you over for the next 4 months while you fervorously froth at your mouth waiting for another poison swamp to play through. And 4 months is quite a while, so if there are any other enemies in Elden Ring you want to see in another one of these videos, leave it in the comments. So let's get into our first stat block, starting with Blaidd. So the stat block here for Blaidd is built around being a fast and aggressive warrior, while also having some magic to boot from his service to Ranni. The Lash Out ability allows him to regain his reaction if he takes damage. This is especially useful for Blaidd, given that he has a reaction that allows him to move and attack if he takes damage. So Blaidd could potentially reaction attack on every enemy creature in a turn if they are all hitting him. Blaidd's slow feature is in relation to his Wolf's Assault action. When dealing damage with that cold AoE, he also essentially puts the target under the slow spell for 1 round. Blaidd's Dark Moon Vassal feature is not something he can do in the game, but this is sort of a take on the Renala's Full Moon spell from Elden Ring, and I felt given Blaidd's connection to Ranni, this would be a good fit for him. This feature allows Blaidd to dispel magic on all magic in a large radius around him, making him very capable of taking on spellcaster enemies and just D&D parties in general, as there tends to be a lot of magic. Other than Wolf's Assault, his other main action is Bestial Frenzy, and this is quite a fun ability because when Blaidd takes this action he gets advantage on melee weapon attacks, and attacks against him have advantage. Think Reckless attack from barbarians, but he also gets to make 2 attacks as part of this action, and any melee weapon attacks he makes this turn force the target to make a strength save. If they fail, he gets to attack again. Now this would mean that if the enemies roll poorly, he could in theory attack infinitely, so long as targets are close enough. However, the caveat to this ability is that after 4 attacks in a turn, he starts taking exhaustion levels for making attacks. So after the 4th attack, it does become a risk versus reward game for Blaidd. His 2 melee weapon attacks are both more than just a normal attack. Cleave allows Blaidd to damage any other creatures within the attack's reach if he beats their armor class, and the Lunging Slash allows him to move half his movement before making the attack. Finally though, Blaidd does have a bonus action to drink a flask of Crimson Tears for some healing. Blaidd's stat block, I believe, does a good job of being formidable against most types of player parties, and I like how clean this stat block is. No fluff, everything here is useful and will get used in an encounter. So moving on from Blaidd, our next monster is the Crucible Knight. The Crucible Knight is designed as a hard-hitting melee monster with some abilities related to its primordial power. The first feature, Brutal Strikes, gives the Crucible Knight the ability to make good use of having advantage on attacks, or enemies having disadvantage on their saves, since either of these causes the Crucible Knight to deal maximum damage on his attacks. The Omen feature just explains the mechanic that allows the Crucible Knight to gain access to new abilities as the fight goes on. This progression is very similar to how it works in Elden Ring, with those signature Crucible aspect incantations not being used until later in the fight. The Primordial Crucible feature outlines some passive bonuses that the Crucible Knight gets after using one of those Crucible aspects, which we'll get into. The Seismic Wave does a cone of damage, but importantly knocks enemies prone, which primes them for the Crucible Knight to take advantage of its brutal strikes. The Flying Dive aspect is our first Omen ability. It requires 100 omens, meaning 100 damage needs to have been dealt to the Crucible Knight before it can begin using this ability. It's a fairly standard line attack, though do remember that the Brutal Strikes feature applies to saving throws as well. Additionally though, if the Crucible Knight has 150 omens, it may, at one point during the line attack, turn and change directions. And it may also grab a creature along the way and bring them to the end of the line and slam them down for some extra damage. At 150 omens, the Tailspin aspect becomes available. It does some good damage in a radius, but also at 200 omens, the Crucible Knight gets to do it twice, and the second has double the radius. Now, at 200 omens, the Crucible Knight is likely close to dead, unless it has a healer ally. But if this attack does occur, it will definitely throw players off who thought they were safe by standing just outside the initial radius. As a bonus action, the Crucible Knight has access to the Ordovis's Vortex after having 50 omens. Again, more AoE damage, but with 100 omens the radius doubles, and those who fail the save could lose the ability to heal from spells for 1 minute, and instead actually taking damage from those spells. Finally, the Crucible Knight has a reaction melee attack if someone attacks within 5 feet, and it gets advantage if the attack misses, which allows the reaction to do max damage with Brutal Strikes. Overall, a very dangerous creature stat block with so many AoE attacks that keep getting better and better as the fight goes on. And I could see this creature pairing well with a healing caster on the battlefield to be its support while it takes on the entire party. Moving from there, our next stat block is the Tree Sentinel. The Tree Sentinel has Mounted Combatant, which gives it advantage on attacks against unmounted combatants, and those unmounted combatants have disadvantage on opportunity attacks against the Tree Sentinel. It has the Blessing of the Erdtree feature so long as it is within 1 mile of the tree that it is guarding. This is a small limitation and one you could remove, but I at least made it just say a tree so that you don't have to have the Erdtree in your game. But of course, feel free to just remove that prerequisite. This feature lets it heal at the start of its turns, and it gains temporary hit points when it first damages a creature on its turn. This feature, however, can be disabled if it takes 20 or more points of fire damage in a turn. Why would I choose to have fire damage be the weakness of the Tree Sentinel? No particular reason. It has a halberd attack, a stomp AoE attack, and a shield rush line attack. It has the bonus action Golden Land, which is an Ash of War that I converted because it seemed fitting. It does an initial burst of AoE damage, but also creates 4 little gold orbs that occupy their own spaces, and can be destroyed. At the end of every creature's turns, you roll d4s to see if any of these orbs attack. If they do, they pick the nearest enemy and launch themselves at the enemy, dealing some damage, hopefully, but also potentially stunning them. Finally, the Tree Sentinel has a Spell Reflect reaction here, where, like in the game, it can reflect spells back at the caster. If the spell is 4th level or lower, this reaction just works, but 5th level or higher spells require a contested roll from the Tree Sentinel to try and absorb and reflect the spell. Alright, so our next monster will probably look familiar, and that's because it's the Tree Sentinel. But with like red lightning, I guess. The Draconic Tree Sentinel. The Draconic Tree Sentinel has the same blessing of the Erdtree and mounted combatant features of the Tree Sentinel, but it has a new feature called Jolt. This feature outlines a unique mechanic for the Dragon Lightning that the Sentinel wields, which will be relevant as well for our final stat block. The feature explains that a creature gains a certain amount of Jolt points from these lightning attacks, and for each point of Jolt the creature has, it takes an additional 1d6 damage each time it takes damage. This means that if you have 5 points of Jolt and you get punched in the face, you will take an additional 5d6 of lightning damage on top of that punch. Obviously not a great debuff to have, however there is some benefit to having Jolt that can be exploited. When a jolted creature makes an attack that deals lightning damage, they can remove all of their points of Jolt and the points of Jolt from creatures within 10 feet and channel it into the attack, dealing 1d12 lightning damage per point channeled. So yes, it is a quite nasty debuff to have, but can be used to your benefit if you or an ally has a way to deal lightning damage. The Sentinel can shoot a fireball as a free action from its horse, however that is on a recharge. The Sentinel has a great club attack and a Draconic Lightning AoE attack that does some damage but applies Jolt. Once per day, the Sentinel can summon an Ancient Dragon Storm, which creates 5 10-foot radius storms that deal damage roughly in the same way as a spell like Moonbeam deals damage. But it also applies Jolt. The Sentinel can move all 5 of these storms as an action, or it can move just 2 of the storms as a bonus action. The Sentinel has a bonus action to infuse its weapon with Draconic Lightning until the end of its next turn, which gives additional damage but also lets it apply Jolt. It has the same spell reflect reaction as the Tree Sentinel. Additionally, the Draconic Tree Sentinel has 2 legendary actions. One is its normal Draconic Lightning Strike, but the other costs 2 legendary actions and is a Dragon Lightning Bolt that functions the same as the Lightning Bolt spell but also applies Jolt. Alright, moving from there, we have our 5th and final stat block for the video. Dragon Lord Placidusax. Dragon Lord Placidusax has the same Jolt feature as the Draconic Tree Sentinel. He has Draconic Resilience, which is legendary resistance, but he must use 2 legendary actions to use it. He also has the Enraged feature. Similar to Omens from the Crucible Knight, this feature will give progression to the fight after a certain amount of damage has been dealt. Not only will being enraged give Placidusax new abilities, but it will also improve some of his current ones. He has a Red Claw attack which applies Jolt, but also while enraged lets him teleport 60 feet each time he attacks. Like any D&D dragon, he has a breath weapon on a recharge. This one deals half fire and half radiant damage. He also has a second breath weapon that he gets when enraged. This fires golden beams in all directions out to 300 feet. Luckily for his enemies though, if you save against this, you take no damage. Unluckily, however, if you do fail, you take 110 radiant damage. This can, however, only be used once. Sort of. We'll get into that in a second. Next, his Red Death ability that he gets twice per day when enraged lets him turn into a red storm cloud, making him resistant to all damage, immune to all conditions, and giving him a faster flying speed. He can only use lightning damage attacks while in this form, and at the end of his next turn he turns back into a dragon and swoops at a creature within a certain distance, making 2 claw attacks at that creature with advantage, and if they hit, they are automatically crits. Placidusax has the same ancient dragon storm ability once per day that the Draconic tree Sentinel had. However, the difference here being that it's a bonus action to do, the radius of the storms are doubled, it does more damage and more jolt, and it's a free action for Placidusax to move these storms on his turn. He also regains this ability when enraged. The reaction Placidusax's Ruin requires him to be enraged and have 100 or less hit points. When he does this reaction, he uses his Red Death ability. His breath weapon recharges, and he regains a usage of his golden fire beams. Also, the next time he uses his breath weapon, he can use his gold fire beams as well at the same time. Placidusax has 2 legendary actions. The one is the same Dragon Lightning Strike as the Draconic tree Sentinel. The other is a Bolt of Placidusax. He places a large lightning bolt on the ground that can be destroyed. While the lightning bolt is there, it will send out a 120-foot AoE at the end of everyone's turns that applies Jolt and deals just 4 lightning damage. The reason being that the point of this ability is really to apply Jolt, not to deal major damage. The tiny little bit of damage is there, however, so that all the Jolt points that creatures are racking up will get triggered and deal their additional damage when struck by this. Overall, Placidusax is a fairly nasty boss for your players, and is just a fun way to include another new type of dragon into the game. Also, the Jolt mechanic I feel is quite fun, especially since normally in D&D bringing the same damage type as your enemy is a bad idea. But in this circumstance, being able to remove Jolt points and deal extra damage turns that on its head. Plus, the Jolt mechanic is something that you could easily apply to other lightning enemies in your game. Anyways, that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the lands between.